Hi everyone, this is Brandon again from TechStep Academy. Today we are going to talk about page objects, the page object model. So if you're someone who has heard about automation before, web UI automation, front-end automation, you have probably heard of the page object model or page objects, and if not, that's fine. We're going to talk about them today. I will go through it as quickly as I can. I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to start off with the official Python Selenium documentation about what they consider page objects to be. I'm just going to explain it to you and give you their example. I'm going to give you a demonstration of something I disagree with in that documentation. And then I will show you a very quick small scope example of what a page object looks like and why we use it. So let's go ahead and get started because I don't want to waste any time on this. We got a lot to cover. So basically, and this link again will be available to you either on YouTube or on the site. So look there if you need it. Basically, what they're saying is page objects are useful really to maximize the reuse of your code. And what it does is it takes you from the scripting side, the sort of basic script when you're automating a browser using a script, for example. Something like what we did up here. You see how kind of messy this is? This doesn't really create a story. What using page objects does is it minimizes the amount of code you have to use, and when you're actually writing the test cases, you get much nicer, much more readable code, and I will give you an example of that in just a minute. But what you want to avoid is the script approach. This right here is kind of a quick and dirty script. It'll go in and it'll do some stuff, right? But not much of this is reusable aside from the fact that that we used variables, right? So this will start to cement itself in as I show you the example. Now, they give an example here of how they would set up their page objects, and you could do much worse than use this. They have an interesting approach. And you're welcome to. I would go through here and read through it if you decide that you'd like to, and see how they do it. What they do is they separate all the locators. You can see that down here into their own module. They give an example of locators.py, and they write a bunch of classes that maybe match with the page objects that they built, which this one says main page locators. I imagine there's a class called main page somewhere. Yeah, here you go. So what they're doing is they're kind of offloading all the locators into this class here, and I do like how they've grouped it by, they have a tuple here that has the by, meaning by ID, by XPath, by CSS selector, and the actual text of the path. That means that you don't have to guess whether it's ID or CSS selector or XPath later. You always know because it's part of the locator. I think that's how I do it in my practice. When I'm creating my automation, I think that's how you should do it too. This is good stuff here. I personally don't separate my locators out. I think it depends on your situation. But try it and see if you like it, and just see what works best. The big thing about all this is just get used to the different ways that you can implement this, and your organization and your project, and you're going to have your own contexts, right, and your own situations. So use the one that seems to best work for you. The disagreement I have is when they create their element object. They have kind of a base page element here, which would be something that, anytime you had an element on a page, you would represent it in code this way. And that's really what the page object model is for. It's to represent the page, as you'd see, for example, here. If you remember our old training ground, it would be representing this as a class, and we could manipulate things in that class just using code, right? Ideally, we'd never have to mess with any Selenium because that would be baked into the class already. And again, I will show you that in just a second. So I disagree with this here on the grounds that what they're doing is they're playing with the internals of Python by saying, well, if you attempt to assign using the equals operator, if you attempt to assign to this object, the instantiation of this object, it will basically call this method here, and it performs a explicit wait in here. Implicitly performs an explicit wait. Implicitly meaning you don't know what's happening when you actually assign to this, but it's calling an explicit wait, waiting until it finds the element. This is a great idea. Baking explicit waits into your page object is a fantastic idea. What I disagree with is basically the get that they have down here, and that is because they're assuming that what get means is if you actually try to call this object, right, and get the value from it, and maybe perform an assert against it, then it's going to go here and assume that you want the get attribute. It's going to assume you want the attribute called value. So the problem here, this will work for an input, right? So if this were called maybe base input element and it was only used for inputs, then I would agree with it. I think that's an okay method of ensuring that you're going to be setting the right thing when you say, this element equals, I don't know, cheese or whatever. And it goes in, and you can see it would send the keys of cheese and it would put it in that input. That's great. And when you get it, it would go and it would extract the attribute of value, which is what it means to have something in an input field. So again, if I put cheese here, the way that I get this is by calling the value. That's great. The problem is not every element is an input, right? I could come up with a very easy example that this would not work on, and that is basically anything else. Anything that is in any text, right, and any of these elements that is actually trapped between tags. So for example, right here, I have a button that we have the two element tags here, and you see we have some text. Calling a get on this would not work because there is no attribute, as you can see in this element here. There's no attribute. Furthermore, no attribute called value or any other attribute. So basically, this is a very short-sighted way of performing this. I think there's a much better way, and that would be using something like a Python property, which again I will show you, because then you get to determine what actually happens every time someone calls that property, and then you return what they would expect. So I know this may not make sense right now. I promise it will settle in just a minute. You can absolutely try this method if you want. It's not a bad thing to know. I'm just giving you my as someone who does this for a living, I don't really like this approach. I also don't like, as a rule, messing with magic methods, which is what you call these, unless you absolutely have to and the value is just so great that it's worth it. In this case, I don't think it is. So you can come here and you can look through this if you want. It's a good document. I'm not disparaging it at all. I think many places could do very well to go by something like this, because many places do not use any kind of organization for their automation. I'm going to show you sort of my strategy and what I think is going to get you more value quicker and what is going to be more maintainable in the long run. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I will say also that this is not the only way to do this. I think everyone that I know, and myself included, in different situations, I kind of decide to do things slightly different ways. So I've probably written 3 to 4 completely different page object models, page object concepts for different projects I've worked on. And that's fine as long as it's maintainable, and most importantly, as long as it's readable. The metric that I use is it going to make me miserable when I use it, or is it going to make my job kind of fun? Is it going to make automating a fun thing, right? When you add test cases, if it's fun to add test cases, then we're in the right place and you're doing it the right way. And if it's almost fun, but there's a couple annoying things, then maybe you can focus on messing with, removing those annoyances, and you will have a better framework as a result. So let's get down to what this means. What is a page object? A page object, again, is just a page, as we see here, represented in code. And even better if that page represented in code is as useful. Even better than that if it's easy to use. And supremely good if it is readable. So readable with a capital R. That's really my ultimate rule. And that is that when you start to use this thing, the tests that come out of using this should be readable by someone who has no clue how to code anything. The tactic I use is I show it to the manual testers that I work with that do not code. I will say, can you look at this and tell me what it does? And if you can't, just by looking at it, almost every step of the way, you should be able to tell me what it's testing, what it's doing, what value it's extracting, what it's validating. And if they can't, then I blame that on myself and I go back and I make it more readable. So I'll give you an example. Let's just take a small subset of this page. We're not going to, we don't care about automating everything on this page because that would be too broad of a scope, right? Let's say the scope for today is to put something in this input field and then take this button and press it, right? And an alert comes up. These two things aren't really related in the case of this page, but for the sake of simplicity, that's what we care about for today. So if I can hope that my IDE is not going to crash again, that's not a good thing. Let's get that up here. And if that doesn't work, we can always go back to our notepad because, you know, Python's basic like that. Okay, so first things first, just describe this as you see it, right? So I see this as, we'll call this a training ground page, right? So it's a training ground page. Probably need the, there we go. And for the one rule that I have here is what we're going to build is a little bit of a skeleton, right? And yeah, why don't we do this naturally? I'll explain the major point here in just a second. Let's get the stuff we need. What we need is, let's go ahead and just get the init out of the way. Pass for now. We have a input, right? I said that we care about this and we care about button 1. That's it for today. We'll talk about these two things. So unfortunately, this isn't given a very good name. It's just called an input field. For today, we'll just call it, you know, I don't know, input 1 or input field, something like that to make this easy. So we want it to be clear, right? So when I look at the code, I know exactly what it's talking about. So over here, I might do something like this. I would say, okay, well, one technique people have is you take a verb and then the noun, right? So you could do, you know, click something or type something, right? So we can, let's create one for this input field and we'll call it type. Well, this is how long do I want to make this name? Type input field. And what do we want? Well, you're going to have to type a value, right? So we'll call it text. And again, pass for now. I just want to get the outline done. And maybe we have click button 1, right? Because this is button 1. That's the one I care about for this test. I care about these two things. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and kind of flesh these out. But according to the you're not going to need it principle, for today, just do these. And then when we need these, we'll build them later, right? This is how we work quickly. And we don't open ourselves up to bugs on these other things when we don't care about these things right now. So actually, to click, we don't need to pass anything in, right? I don't need any information to know that I'm going to click. So we'll pass that for now. So here we have a training ground page, type input field, a click button 1. But one thing I would say is, well, it's well and good to type into here. One thing that might be useful is to get input text, right? That might be good to know. So get input text. Well, which input? We're just going to assume that it's this input for today. I don't want to overcomplicate things. So type input field, get input text, and click button 1. I'm not too pleased with this name. Let's just say type into input. I wouldn't do this if I were doing this professionally. We would be abstracting this a little bit, but I want to make it very clear today in terms of how I name these so that you can sort of see what I'm talking about in terms of the readability. What we might do is maybe create these as element objects and then perform actions on them. We'll talk about that in maybe the next video. For now, we just got to get the basics done. So this right here is a perfectly valid strategy if you have kind of a small a page with not that many things, then this is fine, right? It's readable, you can use it. There are better ways, I think, but we'll talk about those again soon, not now. So how do we do this? We built the skeleton, right? So think about this as we've built something that is this nice, useful, big, think about it as this big robot, right? It's gonna automate and come alive and do all these great things for us. What do you need to make it come alive? You know, this is like the Frankenstein's monster. It's a big mech, you know, it's a robot, it's a golem. We have to power it somehow. And the thing that's going to do all the heavy lifting in here is going to be the thing that talks to the browser, right? So what we have to do is we have to pass in the driver, the web driver. That is what's going to dictate, you know, it's what we're going to use to actually perform and do all this work. So let's go ahead and make it a class attribute so that it persists, right? We're going to use it a lot. Now, okay, let's go ahead and populate these out. To type into an input, we know that we have to, well, to do anything, to manipulate anything, we know we have to find the element, and then we have to do some stuff to it. So we've already done all this, if you recall. So let's just do it again, quickly. We will find the input by ID, because that's nice and easy right now. IPT1. Again, copy paste so I don't fat finger something. So let's do the work. Let's find it by ID. And I should probably assign it to something, shouldn't I? So we will say input equals that. Let's go ahead and clear it. That's something that if you automate enough, you will kind of get to memorize these. And it's time to send some keys. What are we going to send it? Just the text that we passed in, right? And if we wanted to do something like clean this text up, remove the spaces and turn them into underscores, anything we need to do to maybe, you know, modify that, we can do all that here, and no one ever has to know about it. It's all under the hood, right? It's all in the background. So because this is just typing something in and that's it, we are not going to return anything. So now let's take care of the get input text. That would be, okay, well, we have to find the find that element again. Now, because I'm typing the same thing twice here, this would tell me maybe I should do this once and reuse it, right? Maybe at the class level I can assign in a attribute that holds this input element, and maybe I can grab all the elements for all the important stuff. These are design decisions you can make if you, again, as you solve problems. For today, we're going to keep it nice and simple. So there's going to be a little bit of duplicated code, and that's okay for today. Again, IPT1. The reason I bring this up is the fact that we're seeing duplication here, and we know there's things we can improve. These are the sorts of things that are going to lead us into our discussions in the tutorials to come. Right? These are the reasons that we come up with solutions where we maybe make things a little more complex, a little more abstracted, so that we can make them easier, if that makes any sense. So what do we need to do here? Well, we need to, let's say lmtext equals what? We get it from the input, and we're going to get the attribute. I'm going to hope that this all works based on my experience. I haven't troubleshooted any of this yet, so I guess we're going to find out. And what do we need? We need the value. Okay, so we're going to get attribute value. That's how we get text from inputs, if you recall. And in this case, what do we return? Well, yeah, we definitely need to return something. Let's return the element text. Last but not least, click button 1. I'm just going to call it button. Okay, so for the button here, how do we look here? Button, we do have an ID, B1. Good. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. Okay, and what do we need to do with the button? We just need to click it, right? This returns nothing. All right, here we are. Okay, I see this is giving me a very important indication here. This is what's good about your IDE. It's telling me that I'm actually using a name that is a system word, right? It's a Python reserved word. Input, of course, is what we get from the keyboard from the user, which is very similar to the meaning over here, but it's important that I not overwrite this in case I wanted to do something like, you know, my typing equals input, right? If I were to do this, it would actually read from my keyboard. I don't think it's a really good idea to nuke that. So let's just come up with, you know, I don't know, take out the U, right? That's one way of doing it. So that should make everyone happy. Now there's a typo, but I don't care about typos. It's clear enough. Input, we clear it, send keys, get input, that all seems good to me. Okay, so now let's see if this works. So I have a training ground page. I just made some module called POM. I don't need to actually, let's just do it all in the same module to keep things simple. So what do we do? Well, our test, right? We'll put that down here. Let's just go ahead and, here's another important piece. Where is that page? What makes a page, right? How do you define a page? And I would say, well, usually it's got, we'll do it up here, a URL, right? Let's go ahead and give it that. And this will become important in just a minute. Okay, so we've got a URL. I think that's probably all we need. There's one other piece of functionality that I'd like, and that is I'd like to be able to go here without using Selenium. I'd like to just have the page handle it for me because I've already put the URL here. And by the way, again, this is something that we will add on to later. We'll make this more efficient by maybe being able to generate a URL, right, for different environments. Maybe when you're testing this product, maybe in your QA environment, we call it, or your development environment, these could have different host names, different URLs, right? But it's the same thing. It's just in different environments. So there's ways that you can handle that we'll talk about later. For now, we're just going to put the whole thing here. So again, I wanted some convenience here, and that's why we're building our own page object. So if you're building your own car, you know, you might put some little things in there that were customized to you. If you're building your own house, maybe some secret bookshelves, right? Some secret passageways. Let's just call something Go, right? And all Go is going to do is, guess what? It's going to use the driver.get. What's it going to get? Well, the URL, of course, right? So let's give this a whirl and see if it works. So we'll say training page, right, equals what? Training ground page. Yep. What do we give it? We give it a driver. Well, to give it a driver, we have to have one. So normally you do this at the top of the module, but since I'm being lazy, and I want to keep it all in the same place just to keep it very clear, we're going to do it here. So from Selenium import WebDriver, right? Which again would normally be at the top. We would do it in a different, what I'll probably do is write it here, show you, and then I will rip it out and put it where it belongs. So let's go ahead and get our browser. Do that by getting Chrome. And let's handily pass that browser in. I'll use the keyword argument just so you can see clearly what we're passing in and why. Driver equals browser. Yeah, I don't care about all that PEP8 stuff. Come on. Oh, okay, that was the problem. Sorry, I get addicted to trying to make the PEP8 stuff happy. PEP8 is the style regulations for Python, if you haven't heard. It's a good read. So browser equals webdriver.chrome. That gives us the Chrome browser, and then we pass that in. That's the beating heart of our big golem, our big mech up here, our robot. So once we give it the big heart, it's able to actually do stuff with it. This should get us that page. Let's actually go there. And let's do some stuff, right? Let's maybe type into input. We'll say it worked. That's probably jinxing it, but you know, one can hope. And let's, after we type that, let's go ahead and get it, right? Get the input text. Why not? And why not? In addition to getting it, let's print it. So I'm printing that input text if it works. And finally, let's just click button 1. So what I get out of this in this test, right, is you know what? Why not? Let's do the right thing. Let's make this a test. Right? Let's make it look like a test. Since that's if it's not a test, what are we even doing here? So I will go ahead and put this below it for the simple reason that I can do this. Okay, text from input equals that input text right there, and assert that text from input is what? We said it worked, so I can make sure it's that, but I should probably make that a variable so that, again, I'm reusing it. So up here we'd say test value. It worked. So I test value here. The only reason I'm doing this is because I like reusing code. I don't like repeating myself. So I don't want to type out it worked, because if I type it out twice, I could get a mistake, put an extra space in there. This is the smartest way to do it. So that's kind of the setup up here, right? And we're going to get a little more advanced every time we do this, right? I'm going to show you a little more of the professional way that we tend to make things clearer and better. So we have test setup. Comments, by the way, are never a bad thing. Test setup, and then we have, you know, the test. So you can see that if we were just to look at the test here, how readable is this? If I were not a coder and I looked at this, I said, okay, we are going to a training ground page, and then we're typing into the input, we're clicking the button over here. Hopefully these would be named better, right? Because we would have a page that actually made sense. Like in Google, you know, you'd have the search bar and then the go button or something like that. Text from input, and then assert that the text from input equals the test value. This all reads pretty good to me, right? I look at this and I read even the assert statement. That looks pretty good. These need to make sense because as your tests get more complex, the only thing that's going to save you is well-written, readable code. Because you don't have to keep everything in your head. If you have X and Y and horrible variable names that don't make any sense, you're just creating work for yourself, and bad things are going to happen. So readable with a capital R, that's what I go for here. Let's see if this works. Boy, this is a big if. I wrote this all just completely brazenly, assuming it's all going to work. Something's going to blow up. I'm going to tell you right now, but I want you to see it blow up, so hopefully this helps you. That's my excuse. Are we in the right place? We are indeed. So let's see what happens. This is called Palm for Page Object Model. It's just a random name. What I expect to see is a browser to open up and all that stuff to happen that we expected. Okay. Oh, good so far. Bam. You know, I'm pretty sure that most of this worked. So how far did we get? We definitely hit the go here. We made it to the page. That's good. You can see it recognized the URL, go grabbed it, and it went there. Do you see why this is useful, right? I never have to write this again. I can mess with this page all day long, assert stuff. I can come back 2 years from now and write it, and it's all here. And that took us, you know, what, 5 minutes. So type into input. That worked. I see that right here. And click button 1. That worked, right? We got an alert up here. The only thing that did not appear to work is this down here, and I think I know why. So it didn't work because we have an alert there. So when I tried to actually get something from the element, you see that there's an unexpected alert present, which means I can't do anything until I get that alert out of the way. So what I will do is, rather than creating an alert from the action chains that we did yesterday, I know that is probably the ideal solution. Because we're running out of time, I'm just going to, we saw that this worked, and I'm glad that it worked, but I don't care about that anymore. What I care about is that the input text made it correctly, right? So let's go ahead and assert that. So again, I just removed the click on the button, which should avoid the alert, and what I should see is a passed. I should see, let's put it this way. If the assert passes, we should see test passed, right? And again, we will get into frameworks and stuff later, not today, so this is all we're going to do today. And if the assert fails, by the way, you can pass it another value, and this will actually print out if it fails. We'll say test failed. And actually, if we wanted to be responsible, we would say input did not match expected, right? And if we wanted to be fancy, we could put what the expected was. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Input did not match expected. Since we're using 3.6, we can use fancy f strings. So let's do that. Test value, right? So if it fails, input did not match expected, blah. And I'll put parentheses around it just to be clear. Okay, so let's see what happens when it passes, hopefully. Boom, we go there, types it in, test passed. Good, okay. Well, what happens when the test fails? So let's say instead of the test value, I mess this up and I fat finger it. So now it's going to type in the test value, which is it worked, but I'm going to assert against the wrong string, so it should fail, which would prompt this. I just want you to see what this assert, this option on the assert is. This is very helpful. Pretty much all of your asserts and tests should have this. It should be as descriptive as possible so that you don't have to waste brain power and time trying to troubleshoot what went wrong. And there we are. So it failed. Assert, it did not work. And then the assertion error is the test failed, input did not match the expected, which was it worked. So there you are. Okay. So without torturing this too much, and again, normally we would rip all this out and put it into its own module. So I'll do that really quickly because it's a little bit nasty to have all this sitting inside the same. We'll call this Palm test for now. All this will start to get more organized as we move on into more advanced concepts. So now I just need to make sure I have access to training ground page. Now my first inclination was to do this, to tell it, hey, from this same level, grab Palm. But I can't do that because we're at the root level of the project here. So if I were to do that, in fact, I'll just show you. We do that, it looks nice, then we try to run it. And I get no module named main.pom. This is our clue here that something has gone dreadfully wrong. It's saying that it's looking inside this namespace for pom and it's not finding it. And the reason is, well, we're in the root of our project, so I'm going to hope this works. Otherwise, I'm telling you something incorrect. And there we are. So again, we put it in the right place. We put it in a separate module, and it's using that page object, which is really the right way to do that. And what you would do in a real situation is you'd probably create a directory called pages, because again, we want to be organized. We're going to start these practices as we move along, start kind of putting things where they need to go. And this probably could be named a little better. So this could probably be something like training ground page, right? Nice and descriptive. I'm going to throw it into pages. And now you can see my IDE is very kind. It went ahead and it changed this for me. You would have to do this on your own if you didn't have an IDE that was auto changing. So you can see that now from pages.training ground page, I'm importing that. So let's see if that works still. And there we are. This is how you write page objects in their most basic form. And this is how you use it to write tests with those. And that's it. That's all. So for the next tutorial, we are going to start polishing this up and writing page objects that look a little bit more like what they're using in the real world. And I'm going to, all the secrets that I have, the things that I've found through banging my head against the wall for years, I'm going to try and show you how to put together something that is just a pleasure to work with when you're writing tests. That should be fun, should be efficient, and that should absolutely show that you care about this. If this is a career you're trying to get into, or if you're trying to be better at what you do, I want to make sure that this hopefully is information that's helpful to you. So yeah, we're going to go deeper. Thanks for watching. Again, Brandon Blair from TechStep Academy. I'll see you soon.